Yo, Big D back with a UFC 283 preview on the Big D podcast. But before I bring in my UFC buddy, please subscribe, like, and share the Spunky Spectrum Sports YouTube page. See all my content. There will be some NFL content before the week is up. Also, check out the Big D podcast for all your audio listeners on Spotify and Apple. So, the UFC is making its triumphant return to Brazil for the first time in nearly 3 years. And to talk about UFC 283 taking place in Rio, my friend Billy Ward. Billy, UFC back in Brazil. That finally makes sense, right?
Yeah, like you said, it's been a while, and as usual with some of these pay-per-views, when they go to places they don't spend a lot of time in, ton of debuting local fighters, so that'll make it an interesting one. From a DFS and gambling standpoint, trying to get a read on some of these guys where we just don't have a ton of tape. A lot of them weren't even contender series, so.
Well, we do have a lot of tape on the main event, which is for the vacant light heavyweight title between Glover Teixeira and Jamahal Hill. And by the way, before we talk about the main event, can we finally have a 205-pound champ? Because how many times do you have a draw in a five round fight?
I know. It was just, I feel like there's some weird curse of Yuri here where we all know he's the real champion, and trying to strip him of it because he got hurt just cast a shadow over the whole division. But I think we'll be okay this time. Neither Jamahal Hill nor Glover Teixeira really see a lot of judges in their career, and I don't expect that one to change here.
Yeah, thinking back to Glover's last fight where where I think he fought Yuri, right?
Yuri, yeah.
And despite being 42 years old and being probably outclassed, I think Lowell put up a good account for himself in his first title defense.
Yeah, but the only thing we thought wouldn't happen in that fight was Yuri submitting the much older, more experienced grappler, and of course that is what happened. Now it's not like he outworked him with technical jiu-jitsu and did a fancy back take. No, they just beat the hell out of each other, and Yuri had a little bit more left in the tank. But that's about the longest we've seen Glover fight in a long time. This one is somewhere north of -600 to go to a decision, or to not go to a decision. So, like I said, very unlikely the judges get involved in this one.
Yeah, and then with Jamahal Hill, it seems like he's the next guy potentially, depending on what happens on Saturday night, to potentially fight Yuri when he comes back from his shoulder injury.
Yeah, I've been talking up Jamahal for a long time. I'm actually good friends with his coach. Shout out to Johnny Grigware, Touch 'em Up University. Jamahal's a Michigan guy like me. We came up fighting a lot of the same places. Actually have some opponents in common, despite him being considerably bigger than I ever am or was. But, Jamahal, I've been saying this, I think even on your podcast, other places, he probably has the best pure boxing in MMA right now, certainly in the division, if not in MMA. He's a guy who's built for going late in fights because he doesn't work really hard. He's not out there throwing a ton of volume, but everything is precise. Everything is smooth and easy. He's got a real high fight IQ. We worried about him getting submitted again after that Paul Craig fight. I think he learned a lot from that one where Craig kind of just pulled guard. Jamahal was more than willing to engage. Got his arm broken, tried to, beat Craig over the head with his broken arm. So this is not a guy who's going to quit on anyone. And, he's younger, he's got reach, he's got height, he's more athletic. He's comfortable getting into deep waters. So honestly, unless Glover pulls off a real quick submission here, catches him unaware early on, I don't see a path to Glover here. I think Jamal's going to outlast him, just continue to touch him up, as they say, eventually find the knockout. And, even if it does end up being a very surprising decision, which I don't think is going to happen, I'm seeing late knockout from Jamahal Hill here. Excellent DraftKings piece at 8,400. Like the betting lines at, -115 to -130 range, depending on where you're getting them at. Like the inside the distance, you're not getting a great premium on that, but this one probably doesn't see the judges. And if you think Jamal's going to become the new champion, at least until he fights Yuri, like I do, might as well take the inside the distance line.
Yeah, to me, I think the only way Teixeira wins this fight is if he submits because because I don't think Glover could trade with Hill. That typically doesn't go well for 205-pounders.
Yeah, and Glover's got big power. They always say, power's the last thing to go. For anyone who saw Rocky Balboa, they're, bringing the old guy out trying to build some hurting bombs. Glover's got those hurting bombs, but Hill's striking, it's just the most intelligent striking I've seen in a really long time. Kind of in the vein of Israel Adesanya or even, Anderson Silva back in the day, where he's just smart. He stays out of trouble. He knows what his opponents are bad at. He's left-handed. He's long, both of which are real awkward. I don't think Glover really catches him, just given the speed and youth and all of that. But, the one thing towards the submission, I was talking to his coach not too long ago, and Jamal was telling people before the Paul Craig fight, he wanted to grapple with that guy. He wanted to show he had better jiu-jitsu. I think Jamal just got his purple belt. That's not really, going to mess with Glover Teixeira on the ground kind of levels. And since then, he's been real smart about avoiding those positions. Glover's going to have to actually work to take him down. Jamal's not going to give it to him if he pulls guard. I think he's learned enough from that fight. I think that was the perfect, one loss on your way up the ladder that we see a lot of these guys have. And, I wouldn't be shocked if it's a long reign. He matches up well with Jiří, too, if that eventually does happen. Ankalaev is a little bit tougher if they make that one in between, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, we're thinking a little bit too far out of range. So we both like Hill to win by knockout. I am intrigued by whether or not this is, because we always talk about in Cash, like you play both guys in a championship fight. I mean, is that the same strategy this week? Because we've got double championship fights again. So how's the mathematics going to change that this week?
Yeah, this one's really tough. It's also different now with late swap. So, my biggest mistake in my DraftKings MMA career was not playing both Glover and Jiří in the first round of the championship last year, because I looked at those stoppage odds. I said, this one's going to end early. I don't know who it's going to be, but, figured it'd be Jiří. There's no way the loser puts up points here. I think both those guys went over 100, or Glover was close, even in a loss, if not. I don't think we're going to see that kind of fight again. I think we'd be overfitting the model a little bit. Yeah, he had 107 in a loss, which is just insane. But Jamal is not a guy who's going to get in there and brawl. He's not going to trade. He's not going to get taken down a bunch of times and get back up. If he gets taken down, he might be in trouble. I don't think he does get taken down. Also, just like last time, we have another title fight on this card, which we'll get to in a minute. But the other title fight is 225-pounders. Traditionally faster work rates, traditionally more likely to go 25 minutes. So I'm leaning here, and, subject to change, I'm leaning playing Jamahal Hill in the main event, and then both Brandon Moreno and Deiveson Figueiredo in the co-main. I think that's probably the sharper play here. But again, now with late swap, we can start that way, check out ownership, say, oh, I'm behind. I might have to pivot off one of these guys to the other. So there's a lot of different strategy angles.
Well, you mentioned the co-main event, and it's actually the 125. I think that's flyweight division.
Flyweight. Yep.
Well, how about this? UFC's first ever
tetralogy
trilogy, but it's a trilogy.
That would be a tetralogy, like Tetris.
Tetralogy.
Mm-hmm.
But between Deiveson Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno, and this is going to decide things, because both guys are 1-1-1 against each other. One win, one loss, one draw.
I swear someone was just telling me we don't see many 5-round draws. And here we are talking about another one 3 minutes later. No, you're right, of course, as a rule. That's not something we see a lot of. I believe the Davey Higgs Brandon Moreno draw was actually because of a point deduction, not because of however the hell they arrived at it in the Ankalaev Jan Blachowicz fight. But still, yeah, I mean, it couldn't be closer between these guys. If we're going to give anyone a slight lean, I think it would be Brandon Moreno, just because he has the only finish. Deiveson Figueiredo's decision, though, was pretty close to as dominant as Brandon Moreno's finish, so it's not a huge edge. From a DFS standpoint, just play both guys. We're not overthinking this one. Ton of action between the two of them. we can look up how many points they scored in those fights, but like, Moreno in a loss, or Figueiredo in the draw still scored 68 points. When he got finished, he only scored 19. So we're kind of banking on not having a finish this time. But if it goes 25 minutes, both guys are going to give you decent scores. That's from a DFS standpoint. Now, if you want to bet this one, that's where things get a little tricky. Obviously, pretty close betting lines here. I'm trying to pull this up right now, what we got. But it's like, I think, minus 120 or so, minus 110 has been bouncing back and forth. The only real angle I have on that is, Brandon Moreno was a James Krause guy, obviously not still training with him. That's a lot of disruption. That's a lot of change, right before the biggest fight of his life. I think I'd give Figueiredo a slight edge there. He's also home in Brazil, might get a little home cooking from the judges. Brazilian judges are famously not the most unbiased judges out there. So I'm probably not going to bet this one myself. But if I was going to, I think I'd go Figueiredo.
Plus, Figueiredo won the last fight between these guys last January, so he's got momentum. He might have a better understanding of fighting Moreno, and he'll have the momentum from the Brazil crowd first time, because the last Brazil event didn't have fans because it took place right when COVID started, or really started 3 years ago.
Yeah, and honestly, we talk a lot, if you listen to MMA podcasts or read articles or all this stuff, a lot of people will say, oh, it's in France, so we got French judges. It's in Texas, they got Texan judges. It really doesn't work that way for the most part. They bring in judges, it's supposed to be unbiased. What I think happens is a lot of these times, the hometown favorite guy will land a jab and the crowd freaks out. Whereas the, visitor fighter lands bigger shots, the crowd doesn't really react. And over the course of 15 or 25 minutes, the judges get kind of tricked into thinking that the hometown guy is doing more just because he's getting this big reaction from the crowd. We talk about it in other sports where most of home field advantage in other sports is the fans subconsciously influencing the officials. I think it's probably the same thing here, which is a really long-winded way of saying that if this goes to a decision, you're going to be real nervous holding a Brandon Moreno ticket, and you're going to be real confident with that Davey Figs.
Yeah, because I remember not a UFC, but a boxing fight between, I think it was Jeff Horn and Manny Pacquiao, when Manny Pacquiao clearly won the fight, and yet all three judges gave Horn the win by unanimous decision, and I'm like, what?
Yeah, I mean, boxing's a whole different story because of the way their commissions work, and just, historically, a lot of issues with corruption in boxing that, for the most part, we've avoided in MMA. Not entirely, for a lot of reasons. But I still think, one way to play this one too, which is always an option on DraftKings, you can bet on a fight where it only counts if it's a finish, or it only counts if it's a decision, and you get your money back either way. I'm kind of talking myself into it. I might bet that Deiveson Figueiredo decision only line. Usually you pay a little bit of a premium on it. It might be minus 130 instead of minus 110. But that way, if either guy gets finished, you get your money back, no harm, no foul. But if it goes to a decision, then your bet counts. And, we don't really see Moreno getting a decision here unless he absolutely dominates him.
So strategy, probably play both guys and just have at it, because if this fight goes anywhere around, if this fight goes 25 minutes, both guys could put up 200 points.
Yeah, I think if it goes 25 minutes, you're almost guaranteed 200 between the two of them. The only time that didn't happen in their 25-minute fight was the draw, but that's because neither fighter got the win bonus, which is, 30 less points than we would normally expect. So 200 might be a stretch, but 180 for sure.
Okay, so other than the two title fights, which fight or fights are you looking forward to seeing?
There's a ton. Because I'm a weirdo, I'm a big Paul Craig fan. I just like these guys who, they're really good at one thing. They're kind of bad at everything else, but they're going to try their damnedest to make you do one thing. And he's fighting Johnny Walker, who's kind of a weird, unorthodox guy himself. That one is almost a must for your DFS lineups. It's probably going to end up as more likely than not or it's going to have minus odds on the under 1.5 is my guess. So this one's going to be a quick finish. Walker is a million times better striker. Paul Craig is a million times better grappler. Paul Craig doesn't care. He'll pull guard. He'll pull you into mount and figure it out from there. He'll do whatever he needs to do. I think Johnny Walker, he's not traditionally a guy we think of as high fight IQ, gonna fight smart, do things. I think he's gonna rush in at some point when he thinks he has Craig hurt. Craig will pull him down to the ground, either ground and pound or submit him there. That's my lean, but man, I'm not making a tournament lineup without at least one of those guys. I'm also not making a cash lineup with either one of those guys because whoever loses could have 2 points. Like he could have nothing. So, great tournament fight, awful cash game fight. That's a big one. Gilbert Burns versus Neil Magny. I think a lot of people are going to be on Gilbert Burns. I'm pretty confident Burns is going to win. I don't think he ends up with as great of a score as people are hoping. Magny is a long, awkward guy. People don't really, beat him up badly. He kind of just, when he loses, it's tough fights where he slowly loses and the other guy gets the better of him. So interested from a fan standpoint, staying away from that for DFS when I think a lot of people are probably going to go heavy on that. We've got Jailton Almeida as like a -1 billion favorite. That's one you probably just find a way to get him in your lineups. G-Rod, Hobo Cop, as they call him in Brazil. I think that one's a little bit scarier than people are giving it credit for. We've seen Rodriguez have a little bit of issues with his chin in the past, and Bruno Ferreira will just level people. But it's another one. Tremendous tournament fight. Not so good. Not so good for cash games. So if I'm over on Fantasy Labs and building lineups, I might have a rule where I've got, one of Walker Craig and one of Hobo Cop Fahea. Just kind of see what happens, see what it comes up with there.
Yeah, just by the way, how much do you usually play for a UFC event for a non-pay-per-view and a pay-per-view?
Well, this is an interesting question. As you and I were talking about last week, all of a sudden they didn't have all our usual cash games up.
Don't remind me because it was like 11-person line, like 34 full-person lineups. I'm like, what the heck is going on?
But what got me there is I joined a bunch of those, but those were not guaranteed to run. So when those didn't fill, they just got canceled. And I think I originally entered like $300 or so worth of cash games. And then when it started, it was down to like $20 or something like minimal. Because anything that didn't fill, they just canceled the contest. So my normal idea is I enter every single entry double up they have, which is usually, I don't know, $150 worth. Try to do like $50 a head-to-heads, which I really don't like for their own sake. But that way, for $50, you get 50 lineups, which helps you towards the achievements, the underdog achievements or the fast finisher. So if you have one underdog win in that lineup, it's times 50 because of all those cash games or head-to-heads. Throw those out there. And the tournament just really depends on the selection. Like, this time around, they've been weirder with the satellites for the qualifiers for the championship, where they've really only had like real high dollar stuff on most cards. Then every once in a while, a 25 or a 40 will pop up, and I'll enter 4 or 5 lineups in that. So I don't really have a normal plan, just because DraftKings keeps changing things around a little bit. We could of course go play on FanDuel, but they're just going to cancel all the contests anyway. So
I knew you were going to say something about FanDuel because I don't know what it is, but like the NFL, UFC, what is going on with like all this FanDuel stuff? Because I've never seen because I don't think I've ever seen a website just like cancel its contest because of something like this ever.
yeah, and not to get too deep into the industry here, but FanDuel really wants to be a sports book. They, I think, have realized to an extent they've lost the DFS war to DraftKings. They're going to keep throwing contests out there just because there's no risk if you're an operator on DFS. You collect a rake. It doesn't matter who wins. It doesn't matter if you put a bad line or bad salaries up. There's no risk. But they really want to be a sports book, right? They're the biggest sports book in America. I kind of prefer their interface a lot of ways in betting over DraftKings. I think they're probably sharper on lines a lot of the times, but they're just not that focused on DFS. And what it sounds like is a lot of these contests that were supposed to be, if it was supposed to be 100 entries, they somehow let 110, 120 people sign up, which obviously breaks everything. People are going to be mad. And rather than figure it out, they just refunded everyone, which bad look, but better than running a contest and taking money from people when you've taken more money than you said you were going to, and your odds of winning are lower.
Yeah, and plus, if you have more entries than original seats, it messes up the rate because like DraftKings or FanDuel will get a certain percentage of the entry fees back.
Right. Real quick to anyone who's listening who hasn't, Roto Grinders, which is owned by the same parent company as Action Network, they have an awesome browser extension. It's like the DFS tools. I don't know. You can find it in the tools on their website, but it'll show you the rake and the overlay right in your browser for every contest you're scrolling over, which is really helpful. And you were asking about contests and what I play. It's really helpful to just see right in your face. Okay, this one's raked at 13%, but this other one's only 10%, and it's a similar contest. So the super useful. Everyone should have that. Like if you're playing DFS at all, there's absolutely no reason not to have that. Does a ton of other cool stuff too, but
By the way, before we sign off here, I do want to ask you about Francis Ngannou, the reigning UFC heavyweight champ, exiting the sport. What do you when you found out the same news I did, what did you think?
I wasn't surprised. It seemed like if he was going to resign, he was going to. I don't know that he's exiting the sport. He's exiting the
Oh,
UFC.
exiting the UFC.
Right. I think this is a tremendous move for fighters. It sounds like that interview he did with Helwani, he was saying he wanted them to be able to have their own sponsorships back, which was a huge source of income that the UFC took away. He wanted them to have health insurance. He said, I can afford it, but these guys making 12 grand on the undercard, they can't. That would prevent a lot of this stuff, like we saw the whole betting scandal with the guy coming in with an injury. He had to take that fight because he doesn't have health insurance. If it happens in the cage, then he gets it fixed. Really like what Francis was doing there. I think, if we see anyone, it seems increasingly like it'll be the PFL who can really compete with the UFC to sign fighters, even if they're not paying as much, just by letting them have sponsorships and some of those other benefits. That's a good thing because then the UFC has to pay their guys more, benefits everyone. Selfishly, what I'd really like to see is him go take a boxing match, maybe win a PFL tournament, whatever, for the next year. Come back to the UFC once we've sorted out who the heavyweight champion is, and then really settle it in a year or so. I don't know how likely that is to happen. I think it's pretty low chances right now. I think if the UFC starts losing a lot of free agents and people, are slowly paying more attention to the PFL or Bellator or ONE or whatever else, maybe, they come back with a bigger offer.
How much do the How much do the top fighters make for a pay-per-view called? Like, how much would Teixeira and Hill make for the main event of UFC 283?
That's the problem. We don't know. Dana White came out and said we offered Francis the biggest heavyweight deal ever. People said, well, how much was that? I don't know. It's not public anymore. Even when it was public, it didn't include a lot of stuff. The one thing we do know is that if you're fighting for a title or the main event of a pay-per-view, you get a certain percentage of the pay-per-view sales. I think they get $1 for the first 300,000 buys and then like $2 each after that or something like that. And that makes up the bulk of the money for those guys at that level. The last I saw when it was mandatory to disclose, like California forces them to release the salaries, I think the guys were getting either like 250 or 400,000 flat. But compared to the pay-per-view, a big pay-per-view, they might make many millions on top of that. I know Lesnar said at one point he made 8 million at most, which is great. That's a ton of money, obviously. You or I would do that once, we'd never have to work again. But look at what guys are making in boxing. Look at what, Anderson Silva gets paid to box Jake Paul, and he's making more than the vast majority of fighters. So
How much
it's
Floyd Mayweather and Conor McGregor got paid to fight each other?
right. So, when you put it in those terms, is Francis going to make way more money if he goes and boxes Tyson Fury or somebody like that? Yeah. And honestly, what's to stop him from boxing Tyson Fury? Probably losing, if we're being honest. Then re-sign him with the UFC for however much they want to give him per fight and whatever deals he negotiated. I don't see any reason he couldn't do that.
And also, it might not just be helping himself, but helping the other guys, because you imagine the 21-year-old fighter making
12
15,
and 12 to start.
making 10, 12 grand, might have a few more benefits coming his way.
Yeah, knowing some of the guys who snuck into the UFC before the sponsorships were taken away, every single one of them told me they make more money with their, Toyo Tires patch than they get paid from the UFC. So that's a big one. I think that's the one that I don't think we're going to see the UFC pay significantly more anytime soon just because of the monopoly they have. I think if PFL takes enough of their high-profile fighters away, that we could see sponsorships come back. Probably not to the extent it was before, where everybody's got the Condom Depot thing on their butt and 17 other sponsorships. But if they say, okay, you get 2 or 3 spots that you can sell yourself, I think that would probably be a compromise that isn't super unlikely at this point.
And also get more sponsors and fans watching the UFC, so we all win.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that would make anyone watch. Like, I'm not gonna watch because a guy does or doesn't have, the P3 protein snack on their shorts. I don't really care about that on a personal level, but if you remember, they used to even get to bring their big banners into the cage and hang them over during the introductions, and they'd have 15 sponsors sold, and they weren't making a ton, but you make 3 or 4 grand off 15 spots. Okay, that's 50 grand, where the UFC might be paying you 12.
Yeah, 4 times the salary and the same amount of fun.
Yeah, and it doesn't, it didn't take anything away from me either. Like Dana's saying, "Oh, it looks unprofessional." All this, like, did you really care? Were you not gonna watch a fight because Brock Lesnar has Jimmy Johns on his shorts? Like, I don't know a single human being alive who cared at all about that, other than apparently Dana White when he wants to lie to you for a reason to take money away from fighters.
All right, Billy. Thanks for hopping on today to preview the first UFC pay-per-view of the season. We hope things go well, and hopefully, we'll chat soon.
Yeah, should be a good one. And honestly, as much as I'm rooting for my buddy Jamahal Hill and fellow Michigan fighter Cody Stamann on the undercard, what I'm really, really rooting for here is for us to know who the champion is in about 4 days. That's
Amen.
all we need, right?
Amen.